Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming and sitting in on our panel about HR's role in helping employees flourish at work. And thank you, Jess, for the introduction. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves as well as where you work. And to start off, I'd love to hear from you guys personally how you relate to and contend with the idea of juggling in your own life, work life, and your well-being. And Jane, we'll start down with you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jane Cha-Lee. I lead the talent and culture function at Nielsen. Nielsen, as you may know, as the ratings company, we're one of the leaders in audience measurement, so we're watching what you're all watching on TV and all your devices. I was just really intrigued to join this panel. I think many of us had chatted that we're both here to share, but also to learn from each other. I think the work-life juggle is one that I grapple with, and I have been grappling with on my own. I think the pandemic has afforded kind of new perspectives on it as well. And so, yeah, it's something that I actually actively question and want to sort of address both in my personal life as well as for the employees that I care for.
Well said. Thank you, Jane. So my name is Angela. I work at Citi right now, and currently I'm a member of the HR Chief Data Office team as a VP. And prior, I had various, HR different types of roles. And from a, work-life balance perspective, I don't know how many of you thought of HR as maybe a potential career or so, mostly because maybe that plays well into that narrative. Well, maybe that's one of the jobs you can have both life and work at the same time, or maybe you can be in the role of trying to figure that out for yourself, for your employees. So yeah, definitely still on that journey. I joined my current role as a remote worker during the pandemic. So that has been interesting to see that transition from remote to hybrid. Still a big topic right now. We're still in the transition of that. So yeah, wanted to hear all of my fellow panelists on this as well.
Thank you. Glenn Jackson. I am currently the Chief Diversity Officer with M&T Bank. How cool is this, by the way? Like seriously, round of applause from day one. I mean, the last 3-4 years, it felt lonely, sort of with the mindset I have. I was in a cave. I didn't know if I'd make it. And I've got 2 teenage daughters at home, so how do you think it went, Trey? But I'll tell you this. I had
no comment.
I had a moment, and it was more, I'll stop short of calling it an awakening, but because I was spending so much time at home, which was a really good thing. I asked myself a question. I was always present as a father and a husband, but then I asked, was I present? I know I was there physically, but was I thinking about the prior meeting or a meeting I was missing or just spacing out? And I couldn't answer that as resolutely as I could answer that I was present physically. And it forced me into the now with my family, starting with my wife and daughters. And what I didn't know would happen was it started to blend into work as well. So when I sit there with one-on-ones, I'm in that moment. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not looking at the next email. I'm not thinking about that meeting. And it all connected. So to watch as we're going from this prior paradigm of get to work, shut up, don't bring anything with you to work, to bring everything to work, it's extremely important to really stay in that space, be vulnerable, share those vulnerabilities with others so that they can express the same. And you see the power in that. So it's something I'm practicing now. Sorry for the babble, but it's good to be here.
Anthea Hoyle. I'm an EVP at a consulting firm called United Minds. We're part of the Weber Shandwick network. And just for quick context, we help clients through times of change. So we've been dealing with a lot of the same sorts of things with you all over the last few years. And our mission is to help businesses be more human through times of change. So in terms of how I've been dealing with that sort of work-life issue, I have to admit I've been on the team 5 years now. And before that, I was constantly thinking it's just 2 weeks away from if I could just quit this job and I wouldn't have to worry about all the things I'm worried about right now. But since joining this team 5 years in, I truly do think it's because of that team and the way that we work together that I no longer feel that anxiety about, I haven't thought about the 2-week notice thing for a very long time. And it's because our culture is based on big thinking, little details, and giant heart. And I think it's the giant heart piece that's really kept our team connected. And we really roll up our sleeves and get in there with each other. And I think that really helps me.
It's hard to follow that one. I'm Laura Lomeli, and I lead Executive Insights at BetterUp. And very similarly, I think we value some of the same things, and we're really helping people find greater clarity, purpose, and passion. And we practice it at work as well, which has been really incredible, especially as we transitioned into this remote work, which I was very anti-remote work before the pandemic. I like to hang out with people. I like to learn that you're a Buffalo Bills fan, and that you are too. And that's random, because there are 3 of us here on this panel. But you miss a lot of that in the remote work environment. And so it's a bit of a struggle. And I would say there's a few different things that I want to share. One is I really try to focus on the present as well and create a little bit of separation in this constant integration that we're now experiencing. So for me, it becomes very important to step outside, even on the really cold days, granted I don't live in Buffalo, and take a walk around and then get started with work. Because I need that separation, that leaving my house, and then also taking advantage of the space to do that during the day. So can I take a meeting outside? I'm really big on being outside. I grew up in the mountains, so that is my secret. And I think the other thing too is making sure you always find moments of connection, especially in one-on-ones, team meetings. How do you learn these things about the people that you're working with every day in the way that you would at work? So those are a couple of the things that I like to do.
I was wondering if someone was going to bring up the Bills thing.
Of course, we had to bring up the Bills.
So I think one thing that you guys are probably going to hear and pick up on throughout this panel, hopefully, is the focus on the human element, when we talk about work. And I think that's probably one of the most important things. And at least for me at Fortune and what I write about and cover, one thing that I've been talking about and that we talk about before writing a story a lot nowadays is the huge shadow of the pandemic and the ripple effects that it had on all aspects of all of our lives and how that changes everything. It seems now that we are kind of at a point where business, at least, is ready to move past that, to not to put words in people's mouths, but to kind of pretend as if it didn't happen and it's time to move on and go forward from that. But I'm curious for you guys, and Jane, I'm going to pick on you first again. From your point of view, how has the role of HR changed, and what have you seen from before 2020, and sort of what that role is now?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the pandemic, it's hard to believe that the past 3 years weren't 30 years, right? It felt like such a monumental time in all of our lives, and the lasting effects are still here, as you said. I think from a workplace standpoint, I think it's totally flipped on its head, sort of the relationship that employees and employers have. Certainly, I think the things that one expects from one another, the types of flexibility, the types of benefits, the expectations of maybe not putting your all into your work. I feel like that's sort of an old paradigm of the past, and we've kind of shifted into a much more integrated, holistic, really healthy type of approach. I think health is sort of, right, pandemic was a sort of assault on our health, but I think it's also kind of changed the way that we perceive health overall. And so I think that's seeping in very directly into what we expect from work.
Yeah. Laura, I'd love to hear from you as well. And I don't know if there's something to pick up on from that or.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I think it's been, in the last few years, even last fall, the Surgeon General really bringing mental well-being, workplace well-being to the forefront by, having the 5 pillars and whatnot. It's very much the foundation now. And I think kind of hearing your question a little bit, what we're also facing is a tension between knowing that this is the foundation and also organizations having to move really quickly today. The economy is not in the same place that it was a year ago, and they're not slowing down. And so I think it's really a call to action for us in HR of how do we navigate this tension, keep the hard work that we've done to bring workplace or mental well-being into the workplace, and connect it to performance so that they can value it as well, because I think we really have to help them see that we still need to value well-being in order to hit our performance goals. So I think that's the big call to action that we all have.
Yeah. Angela, to that point, actually, it seems at least sometimes that there is this idea, Laura, like you were saying, that business is moving fast and there's, a focus on productivity and just, making sure that you're working really hard and staying on top of it. does it seem like business and like workers, like the human element, are at odds?
Well, if you think about it, who runs the business though? You know what I mean? It's people around, right? So,
But
yeah.
that's sometimes so forgotten that there are like humans that are actually at the center of, the bottom line.
Yes, absolutely. So, one thing we have been tracking a lot, I remember, this might be an outdated term now, like Great Resignation. So like all the companies super nervous, they're looking at what are the attrition data that has been looking like and what might be the result or the reason for those things. And of course, right now, New York City has like compensation transparency laws now, all the company has to follow. And we've had a round of course, remote now is a standard offering, not just something optional. And of course, diversity and inclusion. I'm sure we all remember George Floyd still. And Glenn, I'm sure you have a lot to say on that part of the human element. I worked in diversity field as well prior.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we talked about paradigm shift. There was an expectation, again, that 70% of your waking sort of hours were spent at work where you just weren't yourself, right? You just had to sit in a box and do that. The winners coming out of this in the next 10 years are gonna be the ones that actually focus at that human center and that employee experience. And if you don't, you'll lose. And I think there's an expectation now when you look at employees and what that looks like. If you would have said that 5 years ago, and certainly 10, people would have sort of laughed at you, right? But now you have the data that tells you highly engaged teams produce better products and services, right? People, when you build that trust and they trust you, you see the results of those things. So it behooves you to do that. The problem is you have to shift that paradigm, and some of the leadership is still stuck in that prior paradigm of like, we're just gonna manage to results instead of manage to people in leadership. So I think every organization better center human-centered work and employee-centered first, so then we can talk about delivering to our customers.
Yeah, I think, to that point, at least in the last year and a half, couple years, it seems I've heard a lot of companies talking about the idea of, corporate culture or office culture, which was already kind of fickle, but even more so, especially when you're trying to get people back to the office and be engaged again, seems like something that had almost gone out the window. Anthea, I know that you've talked previously about the idea of mutual commitment, and I think businesses often kind of misconstrue what the idea of like an actual like corporate culture is. I'm curious, can you speak more about this idea and like how it plays a role?
Sure, absolutely. So like everyone else in the world in 2020, we saw the rapid shifts in workplace expectations, but like many of us in this room, we probably saw all of that coming many years before the pandemic. And so we've been thinking about this a while. In 2021, we did a study to basically get a pulse on globally how the workforce had changed, and that resulted in this contribution effect point of view that we have. And it also changed the way that we do employee value propositions with clients. Essentially, it boiled down to 4 key things that doesn't seem like rocket science, but the data backs it up. It's common sense. So the first one is people want a fair deal, which is make sure I'm getting a good deal from being treated well in every aspect that might mean. As long as that's good, you can move on to the second piece, which is meaningful, purposeful work. And having a higher order purpose for your organization is important, but also that connection to the individual purpose is just as important. The third piece is what I get, and that's around flexibility and all that piece, but it's not about hybrid work and all that. It's more about autonomy. Our data showed that people care more about having a sense of control over where and when they work, as opposed to buying in or out of flex work. And the fourth piece is the most interesting one to us, which is what we create together. And that's where the culture piece comes into play. And that's really the key to what we believe is the effective completion of those 4 things, which is this notion of a mutual commitment. So oftentimes, we, meaning all of us, working with clients or whoever, we plan a desired culture or we work out an employee value proposition, and these things look great in theory, but how that comes to life really comes down to every single employee's interactions with each other every single day. So as much as it is up to leaders to be role models and to give the right behaviors, the right expectations, it's up to every employee as well. And so that's part of what we're trying to figure out with clients is how do you get right down into every piece of the organization so that every employee is contributing to the experience that they want in return.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, Angela, anyone else have thoughts on that? No?
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to that too. So something that we found in our data is really around the effect of a coaching culture. So getting at like, how do you bring all of these pieces together? And what we find is that when organizations have a strong coaching culture, so really having that strong psychological safety, really having org practices that are promoting development, as well as having that support from your peers and your managers, when organizations have strong coaching cultures, it serves as a buffer. It serves as a buffer in moments like now with uncertainty, and it helps bring people together, and it really fosters resilience, it fosters creativity. So when you're thinking about bringing all of these pieces together, it's really around like focus on the coaching culture and how do you get your managers and your ICs too. Everyone can really foster a coaching culture. So, I mean, I work for BetterUp, so obviously, but the data proves it as well.
So I'm curious, like, why, do we see so many like headlines or read about companies trying things like beanbag chairs or pizza parties to like foster, to foster culture when it is, that people want really a sense of belonging and recognition, like
yeah.
on a work, level. I'm curious if anyone has thoughts.
Sure, many.
Yeah, lots. How much time do we have?
I think part of the problem is oftentimes we all get challenged from leaders or from clients to make things happen quickly, and culture takes time, and it takes a lot of hard work, and it takes a lot of unfancy work. And oftentimes people also read about what's great for Google and they want to copy it. We often tell clients you can't copy someone else's culture. That business is unique, your culture needs to be unique. Right. And business and culture goes hand in hand. So like beanbags only works for one company, but not everyone else.
Yeah, I love that, right? How many times the leadership say, go over there and see what they're doing and bring it back here? The hell is that? Like that's not a thing. And many of us have, thousands and tens of thousands of colleagues. Ask them, right? Like it's so weird that we either project onto them what we think it is as senior leaders, or we ask them and don't listen and then tell them, well, what you really meant was you want a beanbag chair or pizza parties, right? And that's not the answer. So I think we missed, and again, that comes down from the old sort of our prior paradigm, which is, we're going to dictate how this is going to go. And I think if you just simply slow down and ask your people what they want and what they prefer, you can pull some very important themes that are powerful. And then if you move on that, once they give you the answer, your engagement goes way up.
Yeah, Jane, I'm curious, companies also focus a lot on on the benefits, but sometimes the wrong benefits. And listening to Anthea, it sounds like what really workers want is to feel appreciated and to make sure that their lives are taken care of also outside of work. So, I mean, what's missing sort of in the actualization of making sure that workers are actually getting what they want in order to build the culture that companies so desperately, need? Yeah.
It's interesting. I personally don't think there are wrong benefits. I think benefits are great, and I do relate to what you're saying about sort of the hierarchy of things, right? And so I think there is that baseline need for ensuring that people have health and financial kind of, resources to manage their lives outside of work. So I think that's all great and fundamental, but I do hear I think what people are really craving is more of that career growth and the meaning and knowing that their work matters. And that's something that we keep uncovering in our employee surveys. And it's one of those things that it shouldn't be a eureka. We know this to be true. But I think it's kind of like your beanbag chair analogy. It's hard to get at, and it's so individualized. It really takes every employee and every manager really having those critical conversations and connecting on making sure there's alignment, there's meaning, there's focus, right? So it's the easy stuff and it's the hardest stuff, I think, because it's so basic, and yet we don't do it. And so I would go back to just the need for these, human conversations to take place and for people to be treated as such, right? Help people be at their best.
Yeah, it seems that the hardest part is then once you try to scale that to a, macro company, corporate level, you can have those human conversations like within a team, right? And then that team might, have its own culture and work really well, but the overall organization, there might be kind of something missing. I don't know if anyone, wants to speak or take it further.
Yeah,
but
actually, I'll
yeah.
take that. I think the idea is sometimes they put so much focus on, for example, oh, we need a culture change. Well, let's have a culture team built from the ground up. Or let's say, oh, benefits, so let's focus on benefits. What type of benefit do you need? How much money do you need to fund, I don't know, counseling program, let's say. And but then what about the rest of the 90% of the company, which is outside of the HR world? I mean, that they have actually the biggest chunk to play in terms of playing, like, what is the actual culture of the company? If the employees are happy or not? So it's not an easy answer, and I think that I work at a pretty big place, 250,000 people or so. And so there's a few of us, yeah. So and then it's like, what do you think the culture? I mean, obviously here is not going to be the same as in Africa versus Asia and anything else in between. So it's definitely, it takes, I think HR has the responsibility to come up with a holistic plan to be like, we need to address these different areas in different ways, and then it really needs to trickle down to every manager's manager, every team needs to understand this is the direction where we're going, these are the things companies are doing for you, and has to make that implemented and maybe tracked in some sort of metrics, because what's measured is always what can be done and what can be achieved later on. So also a data person, which is a little biased.
Yeah, I think I've seen that play a huge role also in the DEI conversation, because as we all know, in 2020, huge pushes into DEI efforts. But even in my own organizations that I've worked at in the past years, what I tell people is, well, you can't just bring people in the door. You have to give them, other support and other things that they need. It's not one size fit all. Glenn, I know you've talked about this idea of journey mapping. Can you kind of explain that and kind of where that role fits in?
Yeah, and it aligns a little bit with what Angela was saying. So around 2020, we decided we were going to take an inward approach to understanding our people first before we went and told the world that we're good at something, which everyone did. George Floyd gets murdered, everyone's like, we're doing all this stuff, and they throw money. Instead, we said, we're going to shut up and work inside. And we started with people. We started with our ERG leadership and grabbed pockets of people and asked them harder questions. And we had to ask them 3 times, right? So as a woman, for instance, we had a group, our first journey map was women, and it continues to go. Where do you find pain points in your experience? And we all know what the answers are, right? Like if I decide to have a family, a dead end, right? All of a sudden I'm 10 years behind my male peers. I started talking about, and when I come back, do I have places where I can nurse my child? All of these other things. What it allowed us to do is very uniquely for a group like that, then shift. Okay, now we can do something about it, right? Now, how do we have learning and development that's targeting that? How do we make sure that we're changing our parental leave? How do we make sure that we're more sort of, our policies can actually be more supportive in that space? So that became a mechanism for us where you could drill down and disaggregate the data and go to the pain points of groups. But what we found is as we did that and we looked at Black journey mapping and Latin, Hispanic journey mapping, LGBTQ, and we kept doing it, there were common themes across. So then you could scale, right? Every single group said we need sponsorship. We need people at the top that are talking about us when we're not in the room. We created a sponsorship program. They all said we need leadership development. We created leadership development targeting folks like that weren't heard before. So you could find the uniqueness of some of the groups and then and do something about that, very pinpointed, but also you could start to scale. The last thing I'll say is multiple groups talked about hair, right? And said, can I show up with my natural hairstyle, right? And here's the cool thing.
Can I dye my hair?
Yeah, love it. And here's what the beauty of the mechanism is. We don't do something by ourselves in DEI. We grab all of the centers of excellence in HR, including employee relations, talent acquisition, and we say, insofar as it's their world, you own the people systems, what are we gonna do here? So in this case, we said, hey, people aren't feeling supported to be themselves when it comes to hair. And it was Latin, Hispanic, it was Black, and it was women. So what can we do here? And they said, well, the policy doesn't say you can't do that. And we're like, yeah, Come on. I come in that room, it's like, well, your hair looks amazing. Can I touch it? No, right? Like, the hell are you talking about, right? So that's the disconnect between policy saying you can't do something, but what's implied by the culture. So we said, could we go back into that policy and say words that were never said before, like afros are fine, braids are, like you just started to pour it out there. And now, and here's the beauty in this, right? Now we thought it was for sort of those 3 or 4 groups. And I'm sorry for babbling, but this was amazing. I'm in the bathroom, too much information, and I'm washing my hands. And next to me is a 60-something-year-old colleague pulling back his hair, gray hair. He's a white male. I've known him for a long time. Never did I know he ever thought about growing his hair out. Right, so we changed that policy about 3-4 years ago, and 2 or 3 years later, he's got longer hair than I do, and I'm like, and there it is, right? So you never know who it's gonna benefit. It's like sort of the curb cutting effect, where all of a sudden, you think it's for something, you find out there's themes across, you attack those, and then you communicate it and tell people what we're working on.
Anthea, I'm curious, we're 3 years into the real, huge DEI push and focus. The companies that you work with, or the organizations that you work with, have you guys are they struggling with any of these things, or what's changed? What kind of adjustments are they kind of coming with that they need to make?
Yeah, sure. So we actually have a team that focuses purely on what we call CEI, which is culture, equity, and inclusion. And yes, absolutely, they're dealing with lots of the same sorts of things. But what we have found is that in addition to honing in on particular pieces like what Glenn was talking about, also trying to treat these issues not in an isolation and not in a silo, but also just about the culture overall. So we've been helping organizations to think about their culture holistically, which includes things like hybrid work and DEI and all of it together, rather than continuing to keep things separate. So thinking about all of this in terms of inclusion, no matter whether it's about remote workers being included or different groups feeling included. And it all comes down to managers essentially being more aware of who's on their team and how they can actually connect meaningfully with each member of their team. So we sort of focus on equipping managers and leaders to do that better.
Yeah. Laura, there's this, we've talked a lot about sort of the conversations, you just mentioned awareness that we need to have one-on-one with people. But I always struggle with how do you, like Glenn was saying, institute sort of a policy, and how do you, change the culture at a corporate scale? I'm curious to start with you, what are companies not doing, in order to make sure that they keep and continue to retain a level of humanity in whatever the work, growth, productivity that they set out to do?
So there's a couple different ways to answer that question. I want to go back to a couple points that Glenn made, which is in 2020, a lot of companies put announcements out. This is what we're focusing on. They went inward. And I think that a lot of companies are not taking that inward journey. And so what you have, even when you're thinking about the DE&I space, you have companies that, for example, are giving resources only to underrepresented populations, but are forgetting to give resources to managers to become more inclusive managers. If we don't have more inclusive managers, how will these employees feel more included? And so what we do see is when we can roll this out for a company and we can actually help managers, peers, and underrepresented populations, giving them the support that they need at that time, you can actually have a bigger shift in the culture of the organization. I'm super passionate. I can babble probably even longer than Glenn on this particular topic, and especially because when it comes to underrepresented populations, coaching, for example, is a type of development that they may have never received before.
Right, absolutely.
And in fact, what we see in our data is that they tend to come in lower at onboarding in terms of their sense of belonging at work than the majority population. And at the end of, or after 4 months of coaching, are then at the same point, similar levels of sense of belonging. And one of the things that you can work on with coaching as an individual is really on that authenticity space, right? So to Glenn's question, can I wear my hair down? It's like, how do I show up at work and not feel like I have to cover who I am? How do I say, hey, my name is Laura Lomeli, not Laura Lomeli? And so it's learning that through coaching that they can then bring at work and improve their own sense of belonging, but we also have to hit all these other different areas too. So sort of answered your question, but really wanted to get back to the D&I space because I think it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, by all means. I was just going to say in the midst of your answer there that so often it can feel just like a struggle uphill, once you hire a race and equity editor who doesn't have, the support of maybe the rest of the newsroom to try to, change something without the company actually, changing in and of itself. And I'm sure, so many people in this panel and in the room have kind of gone through the same struggles also. And you did mention something too that I want to hit on, this idea of kind of retention and like people not like jumping ship because there's not that support. I think we've talked a lot about putting things in place to help them flourish, but then, kind of thinking on the other end of the spectrum or the end journey, how do companies think about like, okay, now we have them, we're training them, how do we keep them and keep the talent and the diversity and these different, schools of thought in the building? Laura, if you want to go first, or.
I think it's interesting, especially right now, if you've been reading Fortune lately, it seems like a lot of companies are not actually choosing retention, and in fact, talent acquisition is surfacing as a top trend. However, you think about what you really need in your company, the people that hold the knowledge are the people that you have there. And so when you think about retention, it's really, okay, how do I help develop these individuals? And how do I help them? Maybe they're burnt out. How do I help them get that back up, get their resilience up, and help them become more creative and become more innovative and really push our company to the next phase? And so I think it's really going back to, again, development and really creating that culture and environment in order to retain your talent and choosing your talent. I think, Jane, was it you that mentioned that it was like no. You mentioned like, hello, the people are the business, right? Like it's reminding them that the people are the business and we can't lose sight of that.
Yeah. I mean, Jane, for companies, what's at stake if, for a lot of the things that we've talked about here, both the retention, the humanity, what's at stake for companies if they're not able to, figure these things out?
I mean, the obvious tangible ones are, like you say, it's attrition. It's even worse to me, disengagement, having people actually stay and kind of phone it in. To me, that's a bigger, I think, sort of toxic trait than folks actually making an intentional decision to leave. But I think that the more intangible risk is sort of, people are the knowledge holders, the heart of the culture. It's the ones that really are the glue that make a company be what it is. So I think, losing people, right, we should never get too, kind of light about it, because every individual that comprises a company, right, brings so much to offer. And so I think we want people to be at their best and to really contribute to the culture that really makes people stay and stick around. So I think it's the tangible stuff we measure, but it's unfortunately the intangible stuff that we don't measure as much that I think fall by the wayside.
Yeah. I'd love to kind of start to wrap up with a really easy question, and sarcasm, not really. We've seen even in the past year and then the couple of years before that during the pandemic, how much both the idea of HR and the actual practice of HR has changed in the workplace. So I'd love to hear from each of you just sort of where you see, and maybe even for your specific sort of role in POV, the practice and idea and purpose of HR going and changing in the years to come. And Laura, I'll start with you.
Thank you. So I kind of mentioned this earlier with the call to action, but I think that we've made such incredible progress where people actually care about employee well-being. And we have to continue to capitalize on that. And for me, it's metrics. It's like, how do we elevate the conversation with metrics and clearly connect to performance, to business performance, so that people stop being a cost center? And I think that is our challenge, and that's where we have to shift our focus in order to keep doing what's right for our people.
Absolutely. Anthea?
That's a very good point. I would say, HR as a function has been on a fast trajectory lately, especially becoming even more part of strategic business decisions. And so I think just as the talent landscape continues to change, there's a manufacturing boom starting in the US that's going to have a whole other kind of talent that's going to be needed. And then, of course, with the advent of AI, we're really going to have to keep a close eye on the nature of the role of people inside organizations. And so I think the role of HR is going to continue to have to really think about how do people fit into the business strategy, and therefore how can HR continue to be a business guide and help to, I think, just across the whole organization, there's a lot of coaching that's required. A lot of managers need upskilling. People will still get promoted into management roles based on what they did in terms of that job instead of whether they're good at being a manager. And I think maybe HR can help change some of that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's got to be centered around your employee experience. I think when you think about where we're headed, and Jane touched on this a little bit, like the very tangible reaction will be you just will be less profitable. Think about what happened during the pandemic, like who didn't use a service that delivered groceries, for instance. Now imagine if that employee that was delivering the groceries hated his job or her job, and they're just bonking around, smashing your eggs, and here comes your bag of groceries. Are you ever going to use them again? So that customer experience suffers because that employee experience is suffering. So the moment somebody says customer experience and they don't talk about the employee experience, I've got a massive problem, right? Because you missed the point. They deliver the customer experience, and it cannot be best in class if they're not having a best in class experience themselves. One thing I do want to comment on, and Laura, you touched on this, you have to acknowledge progress. You sort of turn on a monster when, perception becomes your reality. If you're not careful, people will go find all those pain points, and all they see is pain points. And if you don't celebrate the changes you make because of them highlighting pain points and just keep rotating through, like find a pain point, work together, collaborate to fix it with the people system owners, celebrate it. If you forget to celebrate and move to the next pain point, no one will see any change because they're not looking for change, they're looking for pain points. So it's just something I want to express to you, like we are making progress, and if you think you're not, you miss the point. So just make sure that you're highlighting that with your teams as you go. To coach and model that behavior, because it's very easy to think the world is going to collapse. The reality is every conversation I had today tells me the opposite of that. I feel really good about the movement in this room, the alignment, and how you're going to help to affect change across all these organizations, and frankly, bigger than that, all communities that we serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Angela?
Well said. And I'll just, it's hard to follow. I'm trying to. I would say that for HR, we're trying to make it umbrella term. I mean, of course, HR has many different departments within it. How about, at least I know that some of the organizations I've worked with have had trouble coordinating within the HR department. Like, they're all kind of like in their own silo and working, maybe hiring department trying to hire more and retention department trying to retain more, and they never talk really. So maybe we work collaboratively to deliver that one goal, which is employee experience. I think that would really help.
Yeah. And then Jane,
I
finish.
go back to the word you started with, human, right? I wish human resources had a better rap in general, right? And I wish that people did think of us as bringing the human to work, bringing the business to life in a real and enriching way, right? Someone once told me, wouldn't it be great if work was something to be enriched, not to endure? And I think if we could collectively kind of bring that purpose and connection, I think that's at least vision, from a vision standpoint, where I'd like to see HR go, for myself at least.
Absolutely. Well, Jane, Angela, Glenn, Anthea, Laura, thank you so much for giving your time and coming here today to speak on this important topic. And thank you all for coming and listening to our insights, for sure. Thank you.